What if your captivity was your master plan? If the screams that chilled your bones each night were the very instruments of your freedom? Why would a 78-year-old woman willingly become a prisoner in the den of giant wolves? And as the eclipse draws near, will it be her salvation or her final breath? Share your theories in the comments below. The cold was not the cold of winter, but the deep, seeping chill of buried stone. It rose from the floor of the dungeon, a palpable dampness that clung to Morgana Ashford's thin robes and settled deep within her ancient bones. Each inhale was a draft of mildew and old despair. But the true agony came from the metal. The silver chains, crude and heavy, bit into the paper-thin skin of her wrists and ankles. They were not just restraints. They were a poison, a constant, humming burn that leached the strength from her muscles and clouded the edges of her magic. A low-grade fever had been her constant companion since her capture, a silent testament to the metal's venomous presence. She focused on the pain, as she had learned to do over the long, indistinguishable days. She used it as an anchor, a whetstone to sharpen her mind against the temptation of despair. Her violet eyes, still piercing in the near-total darkness, scanned her cell for the 1,000th time. It was a hollowed-out space within the bedrock beneath the Blackwood forest, its walls slick with condensation, the only furniture a pile of foul-smelling straw in the corner. A single shaft of moonlight, pale and weak, pierced the iron bars high on the heavy oak door, illuminating swirling motes of ancient dust. This was the heart of the Alpha Fenrir's domain. The sounds from above were a constant, grim symphony. The pad of heavy paws on earth, the occasional guttural growl that vibrated through the stone, the sharp, punctuating barks of commands. They were always there, circling, waiting. The giants of the pack. A soft scuffling sound, different from the lupin noises, came from the door. The small, barred window slid open with a rusty squeal. A face appeared, partially obscured by shadow, but Morgana recognized the hesitant green eyes and the youthful, anxious set of the jaw. "You should eat," a young voice whispered. It was Talia, the newly turned guard they assigned to the night watch. A girl, really, her human compassion not yet fully scoured away by the pack savagery. A wooden bowl was pushed through the slot, scraping across the stone floor. It contained a thin, greasy broth with a dubious piece of gristle floating in it. The smell of raw meat turned Morgana's stomach, but she gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Thank you, child," she said, her voice a dry rustle, like dead leaves skittering across stone. She made no move towards the food. Talia lingered, her eyes wide in the gloom. "They say you have magic that can break curses." "They say many things," Morgana replied, her gaze unwavering. "Do you believe them?" Before Talia could answer, a new sound echoed down the corridor. The heavy, confident tread of boots, accompanied by the softer, more sinister pad of paws. Talia's face vanished from the slot, and a moment later, the door was thrown open with a force that made the very wall shudder. He filled the doorway, a mountain of shadow and menace. Alpha Fenrir Blackclaw. He had to stoop to enter the cell, his massive, 6 feet 8 inches frame dominating the cramped space. The scent of pine, wet earth, and raw power rolled off him. His shoulder-length black hair, streaked with distinguished gray, framed a face mapped with the history of countless battles. But it was his eyes that held Morgana, amber wolf eyes that glowed with a feral, intelligent light. They were the eyes of a creature who knew only domination. He did not speak at first. He simply stood there, allowing his presence to be a weapon, the silence of pressure on her already burning skin. Behind him, the hulking forms of 2 other werewolves in their near-human forms blocked the exit, their low growls rumbling like distant thunder. The eclipse draws closer, which, Fenrir's voice was a low growl, devoid of warmth, each word carefully enunciated. 7 days. My patience was thinner than your blood." Morgana met his gaze, refusing to blink, refusing to show the tremor of agony the silver sent through her system. "My blood is of no use to you if it is spilled in frustration, Alpha. Or have your sorcerers not told you that?" A muscle twitched in Fenrir's jaw. He took a step closer, the heat from his body a stark contrast to the cell's chill. "Do not play games with me. The spell, the one that grants immunity to silver, You will give it to me. Immunity comes at a price, she said, her mind racing, weaving the first threads of her deception. It had to be plausible, a morsel of truth wrapped in a lie. It is not a simple incantation. It requires a catalyst, a component. Fenrir's eyes narrowed. What component? The venom of a shadow scale viper, Morgana said, the lie forming easily on her tongue. It was a rare creature, difficult to find, buying her precious time, extracted under the light of a waning crescent moon. Without it, any attempt at the spell would be volatile. She let the word hang in the air, a subtle threat. Fenrir studied her, his amber eyes searching her wrinkled face for a sign of deceit. Morgana allowed a flicker of genuine pain from the chains to cross her features, masking the calculation in her own. He was a predator, used a smelling fear. She would give him the scent of weakness, to hide the scent of strategy. You lie, he stated, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. I am chained in silver, surrounded by your beasts. Morgana rasped, a dry, humorless cough escaping her lips. Lying would be a uniquely foolish form of suicide. For a long moment, they remained locked in their silent battle of wills. Finally, Fenrir straightened, his head nearly brushing the low ceiling. I will have my hunters search for your viper, Crone. But know this. He leaned in close, his breath hot on her face, smelling of blood and dominance. If you are toying with me, your death will not be swift. I will let Malik rediscover every nerve in your body before I grant you the mercy of the abyss. With that, he turned and swept from the cell, his guards following. The door slammed shut, plunging her back into near darkness, the bolt sliding home with a sound of finality. Morgana let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, her body slumping against the cold wall. The encounter had cost her. The proximity to Fenrir's raw, anti-magic aura, combined with the silver, had left her feeling hollowed out. But she had done it. She had planted the first seed. Her eyes, adjusting once more to the dim light, drifted to the far wall. Days ago, during a moment of delirium, her searching fingers had found it, a deep, almost invisible crack in the mortar between two stones. And within that crack, something had been hidden long ago. Something the wolves, with their reliance on scent and brute strength, would never notice. A small, clay vial, no larger than her thumb, sealed with wax. It was caked in the same grime as the wall, indistinguishable from its surroundings. Inside was not the venom of a fictional viper, but a fine, iridescent powder, the last remains of starlight moss, gathered during a celestial alignment a century past. A key component of the true spell she intended to cast. It was not a spell of immunity. It was a spell of annihilation. She closed her eyes, the ghost of a smile touching her cracked lips. Let them hunt for their viper. Let them believe they were in control. Every moment they spent searching was a moment closer to the eclipse, a moment closer to her final stand. The game had begun. The silence after Fenrir's departure was heavier than before. It was a pregnant quiet, filled with the echo of his threat and the phantom ache in Morgana's bones from the silver's poison. She focused on the memory of the hidden vial, its cool, solid presence, a talisman against the despair that threatened to crest over her. The starlight moss was hope, but it was a fragile, desperate hope, one that required perfect alignment of events as delicate as the cosmos itself. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the slow shift of the faint light from the high window and the changing of the guards. Talia's shift ended, replaced by a hulking, silent brute who smelled of wet dog and old blood. He offered no words, only a periodic, menacing sniff at the door slot. It was deep into the night when a new sound came. Not the confident stride of Fenrir, nor the hesitant step of Talia, but a slow, shuffling drag, accompanied by the soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap of wood on stone. A familiar dread, cold and sharp, pierced through the constant haze of Morgana's pain. She knew that sound. It was the sound of a past she had tried to bury. The viewing slot slid open. A single, milky white eye peered through, gleaming with a venomous curiosity. Then, the door groaned open, and Alara Hintogulsu entered the cell. Time had not been kind to Morgana's former coven sister. It had twisted her body as it had twisted her soul. Her back was hunched into a permanent curve, forcing her to lean heavily on a twisted staff of dark wood. Her long gray hair was braided with grimy cords, and her face was a roadmap of bitterness and spite. The smell of dried herbs, dust, and something faintly rotten followed her in. Well, sister. Alara's voice was a dry rasp, like stones grinding together. The great Morgana Ashford, brought so low, the silver moon coven's brightest star, now extinguished in a hole in the ground. I must admit, the view from down here suits you. Morgana did not rise to the bait. She simply watched Alara, her violet eyes flat and unreadable. Alara. I wondered when Fenrir's new pet would come to sniff around. Alara's lips stretched into a smile that showed her crooked, yellowed teeth. Pet, I am his advisor, his seer, the one who told him that your blood, the blood of the Coven's former leader, held the key to his salvation. You should be thanking me. I've made you invaluable. Salvation. Morgana gave a weak, rattling cough. You have delivered him into my hands, you fool. You always were too blind to see the larger tapestry. Alara's smile vanished. She shuffled closer, her one good eye narrowing. Do not try your clever words on me, Morgana. I am immune to them now. I have seen the truth. Power is the only tapestry that matters. And you, wrapped in silver, have none. She leaned on her staff, her gaze sweeping over Morgana's pathetic state. He wants the jade eye. Where is it? Morgana's heart gave a single, hard thump against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of weary indifference. The jade eye. So that was the name Alara had concocted for her fabrication. A name designed to sound powerful, mystical. It was perfect. The jade is not a bauble to be handed over, Morgana said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, playing into the narrative. Its power is volatile. Fenrir is not ready. His aura is too chaotic, too bestial. It would consume him. This was a dance. To feed the lie just enough to make it appetizing, to make it seem like a prize that required effort and worth. She had to make them want the fake key so badly they wouldn't think to look for the real one. Alara's eye gleamed with avarice. You have it. I know you do. You would never have come here without your greatest weapon. I came here, Morgana said, locking eyes with her old rival, because this is where I needed to be. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Alara's twisted features. She had expected defiance, perhaps begging, not this calm, cryptic assurance. It unsettled her. Your arrogance will be your end. Fenrir grows impatient. The vampire scouts have been spotted at the forest's edge. The Crimson Court circles. He will not wait for long. Vampires. The word sent a different kind of chill through Morgana. Vladimir Crimson. He would be among them. His was a cold, calculating mind, a stark contrast to Fenrir's brute force. He was another variable, another predator drawn to the scent of her supposed power. Her plan had to account for him, too. Let the vampires come, Morgana whispered, a genuine weariness seeping into her tone. They will only hasten the end you have all chosen. Frustrated, Alara slammed the butt of her staff on the stone floor. Tap! The sound echoed sharply in the small space. Where is the catalyst for the immunity spell? Fenrir spoke of a viper's venom. Tell me where to find it. Morgana closed her eyes, as if the conversation had exhausted her. The shadow-scale viper nests in the sun-bleached ruins east of the Whispering River. It only emerges when the moon is a sliver in the sky. But be warned, Alara, searching for it has its own perils. The forest guards its secrets. It was all a fabrication. The ruins were real, the river was real, but the viper was a myth she had just invented. Let them waste their energy. Let them face the genuine dangers of the Blackwood for a phantom. Alara studied her for a long moment, suspicion and greed warring in her gaze. Finally, she turned and shuffled back toward the door. I will have your jade eye, sister, and I will watch as Fenrir uses its power to grind your bones to dust. The door closed, leaving Morgana once more in silence. The encounter had been a success, but it left her feeling soiled. The memory of their shared past, of a friendship turned to bitter enmity, was a different kind of poison. Later, when Talia returned for the dawn watch, her presence was a balm. The young guard said nothing, but when she slid the food bowl through the slot, Morgana saw it. Nestled beside the usual piece of gristle was a small, fresh bundle of comfort leaves, known for their healing properties. Morgana's eyes met Talia's through the slot. It was not just an act of kindness. It was a message. An alliance, fragile and unspoken, was forming. "Thank you, child," Morgana said softly, her voice carrying a weight it hadn't with Alara or Fenrir. Talia simply gave a barely perceptible nod before closing the slot. Alone again, Morgana picked up the comfort leaves, their green, earthy smell a stark contrast to the cell's decay. She had planted seeds of deception with her enemies, and now, a seed of hope had been planted with a potential ally. The game was indeed underway, and the board was becoming more complex by the hour. She had to be ready for the next move. The vampires were coming. The days bled into a tense rhythm of silence and anticipation. Morgana used the comfort leaves, crushing them against the raw, burning wounds on her wrists. The relief was minor, a fleeting coolness against the constant fire of the silver, but it was a symbol, a reminder that not all in this den of wolves were lost. She spent her waking hours in a state of focused meditation, conserving her strength, pushing her awareness beyond the stone walls. She could feel the energy of the forest, a deep, thrumming life force that the wolves' corruption could not fully extinguish. And she could feel the approach of the full moon. Its pull was a tangible tide, stirring the magic in her blood and the savagery in her captors. The night of the full moon arrived, thick and heavy with primal energy. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a low, resonant hum. The usual sounds from above had changed. The pace padding was replaced by restless, frantic scrabbling, punctuated by sharp, excited yips and deep-throated growls that spoke of an instinct barely held in check. Morgana knew what was coming. This was not just any full moon. It was the hunter's moon, a time of heightened power and ferocity for the werewolves. Fenrir would not waste the opportunity. The door to her cell was thrown open with a force that splintered the wood around the lock. Framed in the doorway was not the man, but the beast. Alpha Fenrir stood in his hybrid form, a terrifying fusion of man and wolf, towering over 7 feet tall. Coarse, dark fur covered his powerfully muscled body, and his snout was pulled back in a snarl, revealing dagger-like fangs dripping with saliva. His amber eyes blazed with an unchecked, feral light. "Bring her," he growled, the words distorted, guttural. Beta Orkin and another brute, both in similar, though smaller, hybrid forms, entered the cell. The stench of wet fur and raw meat was overwhelming. They did not bother with gentleness. Orkin backhanded her across the face, a casual blow that snapped her head back and filled her mouth with the coppery taste of blood. Then they grabbed her by the arms, their claws digging deep, and dragged her from the cell. They took her to a vast, open cavern deep within the warren. This was the ritual chamber. The air was thick with the smell of blood and smoke. A massive, crude altar of dark stone stood in the center, stained black with old sacrifices. Torches flickered in sconces on the walls, casting dancing, monstrous shadows. Pack members, all in their wolf or hybrid forms, circled the space, their eyes glowing like embers in the semi-darkness. In the corner, Morgana saw Malik, the torturer, his obese form quivering with excitement, a tray of gleaming, sinister tools laid out beside him. Fenrir threw her onto the cold stone of the altar. The impact drove the air from her lungs. He loomed over her, a giant of shadow and fury. "Now, witch," he snarled, his hot breath fogging in the chill air. "The hunter's moon gives us strength. It will unlock the truth in your blood. You will give us the spell, or you will watch as we tear your coven sister, Helena, limb from limb." At a signal, 2 wolves dragged a frail, weeping figure into the chamber. Sister Helena Nightsbane, her wild white hair a ghostly halo, her haunted eyes wide with terror. Morgana's heart clenched. This was a variable she had not anticipated. She could endure her own pain, but the weight of another's life, especially one so broken, was a different kind of chain. "Your theatrics are pointless, Fenrir," Morgana rasped, pushing herself up on her elbows. "The spell requires precision, not brute force. You will get only death this night. Then we will have death." Fenrir roared. He nodded to Malik. The torturer waddled forward, selecting a long, thin blade with a cruel, hooked end. He leered at Morgana. But before he could take another step, Morgana spoke again, her voice cutting through the chaos. Wait. All eyes were on her. She looked at Fenrir, then at Helena, sending a silent, desperate plea for strength to her old friend. She had to give them something. A piece of the puzzle, but not the picture. The catalyst, the shadow scale venom. It must be mixed with the blood of the caster under the full moon, she said, the life flowing easily, woven with a thread of truth. But the incantation is complex. A single mispronounced syllable, a moment of doubt in your heart, and the magic will reverse. It will not grant immunity. It will make the very air you breathe burn like silver dust in your lungs. She was playing a dangerous game, bluffing with a hand that had no cards. But she poured every ounce of her remaining power into her voice, into her gaze, making it feel true. Fenrir's glowing eyes bored into her. He could smell her fear, but he could also sense the unwavering certainty in her words. The pack around them grew restless, uneasy. The idea of a backfiring curse was a potent fear. Prove it, Fenrir demanded. A demonstration, a small spell. Show me its nature. This was the moment. She had to make it convincing. She closed her eyes, drawing not on the deep well of her power that was reserved for the eclipse, but on the surface, on the pain from her wounds, on the fear in the room. She whispered a string of archaic words, a simple illumination charm twisted with a minor pain-inducing hex. A harmless thing, but it would serve her purpose. A soft, silver light emanated from her hands, coalescing into a shimmering orb above the altar. Then, with a sharp gesture, she sent a wave of psychic discomfort, a sudden, sharp headache, washing over the entire assembly. Wolves yelped and shook their heads. Men grunted and clutched their temples. It was fleeting, but it was real. The silver light pulsed, and for a heart-stopping moment, Morgana let it flare, making it seem as if it were about to spiral out of control. She let a trickle of genuine energy, tainted by the silver's burn, leak into it, causing the light to flicker erratically. See? She gasped, letting her body go limp, feigning exhaustion. The balance is delicate. Without the precise component and a calm, focused mind, this is what you invite. Not power, but agony. The display had its effect. The pack was unsettled. Fenrir stared at the fading silver light, a new, calculating look in his feral eyes. The risk was now real to him. Take her back, he ordered, his voice a low rumble. The ritual frenzy had been broken by the cold splash of potential consequence. As the brutes dragged her from the chamber, Morgana's eyes met Helena's. In the old woman's terrified gaze, she saw a flicker of understanding, of gratitude. She had saved them both for now. Back in her cell, thrown onto the cold straw, Morgana lay panting, the adrenaline fading to leave a deep, bone-weary ache. She had survived the full moon. She had turned their ritual into her own performance. But as she lay there, she saw a figure standing just outside her cell door, partially hidden in shadow. It was Luna, the Alpha's daughter. She wasn't looking at Morgana with anger or suspicion, but with something else entirely, a dawning, troubled curiosity. She had seen the display. She had felt the controlled power, and she had seen her father's rage checked by caution. The seed of doubt, Morgana thought as she closed her eyes, was not just for the young Gartalia. It was taking root in the most unexpected of places. The pack was not a monolith, and cracks were beginning to show. The days following the hunter's moon were a study in taut silence. The frantic energy of the pack had subsided, replaced by a watchful, simmering tension. Morgana, nursing the fresh bruises and the deeper ache of expended energy, could feel the shift. Fenrir's frustration was a palpable heat radiating through the stone, but it was now tempered by a wary calculation. Her bluff had worked, buying her not just time, but a sliver of psychological ground. It was during Talia's watch, in the dead of night, that the change came. The young guard was more agitated than usual, her fingers tapping a nervous rhythm against the shaft of her spear. "Scouts have returned," Talia whispered, her voice barely audible through the slot. "From the eastern ridge. They speak of pale men, moving through the trees like smoke. They left no tracks, only a cold scent. The vampires, Vladimir Crimson and his kin. They were here." Morgana's heart, a tired old drum, beat a little faster. This was both a threat and an opportunity. A new predator on the field would force Fenrir to divide his attention. Vladimir. Morgana breathed the name, letting it hang in the air like a curse. He is not a brute to be cowed by displays of power. He is a spider, and he feels the vibrations in his web. What does he want? Talia asked, her green eyes wide with a fear that was different from the fear of her own pack. This was the fear of the unknown, of an ancient, cold evil. What all creatures of power want, Morgana replied, her gaze distant. More. He seeks to exploit weakness, to turn his enemies against each other. He knows Fenrir has a prize. He has come to see if he can steal it. As if summoned by their conversation, a new presence brushed against the edges of Morgana's awareness. It was not the hot, bestial aura of the werewolves, nor the simple life force of a human. It was cold, sharp, and ancient, like a glacier filled with needles. It was a psychic probe, subtle and insidious, testing the barriers of her mind. Morgana Ashford. The voice in her head was smooth as silk, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. What a singularly undignified predicament for a witch of your renown. Morgana clenched her will, throwing up mental shields forged over centuries. The silver chains at her wrists flared with a fresh, biting pain, as if the vampire's presence aggravated their poison. Vladimir, she thought back, the mental effort exhausting. Have you come aglow? Or to make an offer you imagine I cannot refuse? A cold, amused laugh echoed in her skull. I have come to observe a caged tiger and the foolish dogs who believe they control her. Fenrir seeks a blunt instrument. I seek a key. My master, Lord Valerius, has use for a mind such as yours. We could extract you from this squalor. The offer was a lie, of course. They would simply trade one prison for another, one set of torturers for a more refined, but no less deadly, kind. But they were also another piece on the board. Your master can keep his offers, Morgana projected, pouring all her contempt into the thought. I'm exactly where I mean to be. But tell me, do you truly believe Fenrir will share his prize? Or are you here to pick at the bones after the wolves have torn each other apart? She pushed an image into the probe, a memory of the full moon ritual, of Fenrir's rage, of the silver light flickering dangerously. She let Vladimir feel the instability, the potential for catastrophic failure. The vampire's presence recoiled slightly, not in fear, but in recalculating interest. Interesting. The artifact is unstable. The brood is playing with forces he does not comprehend. My lord will be most intrigued. Perhaps we will wait. The view from the shadows is so often the most illuminating. The cold presence withdrew as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving a lingering chill in the air and a throbbing pain behind Morgana's eyes. The mental confrontation had been brief, but had cost her. She slumped against the wall, breathing heavily. She had done it again. She had planted a seed, this time in the mind of a vampire. Let them think the Jedi was real and unstable. Let them hesitate. Let them watch and wait. Their inaction was her ally. Later that night, a different, smaller shadow appeared at the door slot. It was not Talia. A nervous, trembling hand pushed not food, but a small clay jar through the opening. It was simple, unadorned, and filled with a pungent, herbal salve. Omega Khan. A voice, thin and reedy with fear, whispered, "For the burns." The silver. Then the shadow was gone, retreating into the darkness with a hurried, limping gait. Morgana picked up the jar. The salve was cool and smelled of witch hazel and calendula. Another crack in the monolith. Another silent ally. The Pax Omega, the lowest of the low, had risked everything to offer this small kindness. She applied the salve to her wrists, the relief more pronounced than from the comfrey. As she did, her fingers, now slightly more nimble, traced the crack in the wall where her vial of starlight moss was hidden. The vampires were circling. The pack was fracturing. The eclipse was drawing nearer. The forest was filled with shadows, each with its own agenda. And Morgana, the prey at the center of it all, knew she had to weave them all into her tapestry. The wolves, the vampires, the reluctant guards, and the silent helpers, they were all threads. And she was the one holding the needle. The final design was yet to be seen, but the pattern was beginning to emerge from the chaos. The salve from Omega Khan was a small miracle. For the first time in weeks, the constant, searing pain in Morgana's wrists and ankles receded to a dull, manageable throb. The relief was not just physical, it was a liberation of her mind. The fog of agony lifted, allowing her thoughts to sharpen, her senses to extend beyond the stone walls with a clarity she had almost forgotten. She used this newfound focus to observe Talia. The young guard's internal conflict was a silent storm playing out in the tightness of her shoulders, the hesitation in her step, the way her eyes darted towards the upper levels where the Alpha's commands echoed. The arrival of the vampires had heightened the pack's paranoia, and Talia was caught in the crosscurrents. During the deepest watch of the night, when the forest outside held its breath, Morgana decided to gamble. The time for subtle hints was over. She needed an active accomplice, not a sympathetic observer. The jade eye's a lie, child. Morgana's voice cut through the silence, soft but clear, devoid of its usual rasp. Talia, who had been leaning against the door, jerked upright. Her face appeared at the slot, eyes wide with confusion and alarm. What? A fabrication, Morgana continued, her violet eyes holding Talia's gaze. A story spun by a bitter old woman to poison Fenrir's mind. There is no artifact that grants immunity to silver. The confession hung in the air, dangerous and absolute. Talia's mouth opened, then closed. She was trying to process the magnitude of the deception, the sheer audacity of it. Then, why are you here? Why does he keep you alive? Because the truth is more valuable than the lie, Morgana said, leaning forward, the chains clinking softly. But it is not a truth for him. It is a truth for you. She took a slow breath, weaving the final threads of her trust. The power Fenrir seeks, it was never in an object. It is a bloodline, a legacy. It sleeps in my granddaughter, Celine. She is the true key. What he calls the Jade Eye is not a stone, but a soul, a latent power that can be awakened. My purpose here was never to be his prisoner. It was to be the diversion, the beacon that draws his gaze while the true power remains safe, until the eclipse gives her the strength to rise. Talia stared, her youthful face a canvas of shock and dawning understanding. The entire foundation of her captivity, the reason for the pack's fervor, was a misdirection. You used yourself as bait. The oldest wolf is trapped not by the strongest chain, but by the most alluring scent, Morgana said, a faint, grim smile touching her lips. But the trap is about to spring. The eclipse approaches. I have a spell, one that can break Fenrir's hold, but I cannot cast it from this cell. I need to be in the heart of their ritual chamber, where the ley lines of this forest converge. She let the implication hang in the air, a tangible, terrifying request. Talia took a step back from the door, her breath fogging in the cold air. You're asking me to help you escape? To betray my pack? The words were a horrified whisper. I'm asking you to help them. Morgana countered, her voice intense. Look at what Fenrir has made them. Look at the cruelty, the fear. He leads them to ruin, chasing a phantom, while real enemies gather at the borders. Luna sees it. Khan feels it. Do you not? This is not about betrayal, Talia. It is about salvation. For all of us. The sound of heavy, booted footsteps echoed down the corridor. Beta Orkin was making his rounds. Talia's face vanished from the slot, her panic palpable even through the thick wood. Morgana heard her fumbling with her spear, trying to compose herself. Orkin's grizzled face appeared at the slot, his cold gray eyes scanning the cell. He sniffed the air, his nose wrinkling. Smells different in here. Less like dying witch. His gaze fell on Morgana, who had arranged herself in a posture of exhausted sleep. He grunted, unsatisfied, but finding no obvious cause for alarm. Keep alert, pup, he snarled at Talia before moving on. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Morgana waited, her heart a slow, steady drum in her chest. She had thrown the dice. Now, she had to see how they would land. Long minutes passed. Then a whisper, so faint it was almost a thought. What must I do? Relief, warm and fierce, flooded through Morgana. She had her ally. The night of the eclipse. Morgana whispered back, the plan unfolding in her mind like a deadly flower. There will be chaos. The vampires will move. Fenrir will be distracted, trying to force the ritual. You must get me to the chamber. That is all. Get me to the chamber, and I will do the rest. And after? Talia's voice was small, scared. After, Morgana said, her voice softening, you will have a choice. A new pack, or a new path. But you will be free of this darkness. There was no more talk. The pact was sealed. Morgana leaned back against the cold stone, the vial of starlight moss a hard, reassuring lump against her palm where she had secretly retrieved it. The bait had been taken, the trap was set, and now a key had been turned in the lock. The final act was approaching. All that was left was to open the door and step into the storm. 3 days until the eclipse. The air in the dungeon grew thick, not just with damp and decay, but with a gathering tension that was both magical and mundane. Morgana could feel it thrumming in the stones, a low-frequency hum that vibrated in her teeth. The pack's movements above were no longer just restless. They were frantic, a hive preparing for a war it did not fully understand. Shouts, the clang of weapons being forged, and the constant, agitated growls painted a picture of an army on the brink. The pain from the silver was a distant echo now, thanks to Khan's salve. Her mind, clear and sharp, felt like a polished blade. She spent her hours in a deep, trance-like state, conserving every spark of her power, mentally rehearsing the intricate steps of the spell she would cast. It was a symphony of ruin, and she was its conductor, waiting for the curtain to rise. It was in this state, hovering between waking and dreaming, that the world around her dissolved. The cold stone vanished, replaced by a soft, mossy ground. The stench of the dungeon was swept away by the scent of damp earth, blooming nightshade, and ancient bark. She stood in a moon-dappled grove, the trees towering and wise, their leaves whispering secrets in a language older than words. Before her stood a being of light and wood, her form shifting like mist, her skin the texture of weathered willow, her hair a cascade of living branches. Her eyes were 2 pools of pure, verdant light. Grandmother Willow, Morgana breathed, her dream voice filled with a reverence she had not felt in a century. Morgana Ashford, the Ancient One's voice was not a sound, but a feeling, a resonance that bloomed directly in the soul. The wheel turns. The sky prepares to bleed. Your purpose nears its zenith. The spell, Morgana said, her dream self stepping closer. I have the components. I have the will. But the sequence, the alignment of the ley lines with the celestial event, it is a fragile thing. Fragile as a spider's web, and as strong, the spirit intoned. You must not be in the chamber when the moon's shadow first kisses the earth. You must be at its center when the shadow is complete. The moment of totality is your crucible. Not a second before, not a second after. The energy must be channeled, not merely released. You are not a weapon, child. You are a conduit. An image flooded Morgana's mind, the ritual chamber, but seen from above, as if through the eyes of a bird. She saw the stone altar not as a block, but as a nexus point where 3 silvery rivers of magical energy, the ley lines, converged. She saw the precise spot, a hairline fracture in the altar's center, where the power would be most focused. The chains that bind you are also your anchor, Willow's voice continued, a cryptic note in its melody. Their poison has become your tolerance, their weight, your focus. Do not shed them until the moment you draw the final rune. The silver will ground the cosmic fire, lest it consume you from within. The vision shifted. She saw the sequence of the spell not as words, but as a dance of light and symbol. A complex series of hand gestures, each one pulling a thread of power from the ley lines, weaving it with the starlight moss, and finally, infusing it with a burst of celestial energy from the eclipse. She saw the final, crucial step, a rune of unbinding, drawn not in the air, but etched into the stone of the altar with her own blood, a sacrifice to seal the working. The wolf's daughter's heart is a compass, pointing true north, the Ancient One whispered, her form beginning to fade, dissolving back into the mist of the grove. Trust the shadow that walks in light. Beware the traitor whose loyalty is a shifting sand. The vampire's gaze is a key, but it will unlock a door you may not wish to open. The dream evaporated. Morgana's eyes snapped open in the oppressive darkness of her cell. She was drenched in a cold sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs. But her mind was alight. The complex patterns of the spell burned into her memory with perfect clarity. She knew the timing. She knew the place. She knew the cost. The final piece of the puzzle had been given to her. Later, when Talia came with the dawn meal, Morgana was waiting. The night of the eclipse, Morgana said, her voice low and urgent, "You must not get me to the chamber early. We must wait for the perfect moment, when the moon's shadow is complete. Do you understand? The timing is everything." Talia nodded, her face pale but determined. "I understand. I will watch the sky. I will find a way." She hesitated. Luna, the Alpha's daughter, she has asked questions. About the vampires. About the cost of my father's of Fenrir's war. The wolf's daughter's heart is a compass, Morgana recalled. "Be careful with her," she warned. "But do not push her away. Her doubt is a weapon we may yet wield." As Talia left, Morgana's fingers found a crack in the wall and the vial within. The starlight moss felt warm to the touch, as if anticipating the role it was about to play. She had the plan. She had the ally. She had the knowledge. The final countdown had begun. The forest held its breath, and in the silence, Morgana Ashford prepared for her final stand. The day before the eclipse dawned with an unnatural stillness. The frantic energy that had gripped the pack for days seemed to have solidified into a hard, brittle tension. The air was thick and heavy, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Sounds were muffled. Even the usual growls and barks from above were subdued, replaced by a watchful, predatory silence. Morgana sat cross-legged in the center of her cell, her back straight, her hands resting on her knees. Her breathing was slow and measured, a steady rhythm in the oppressive quiet. She was a vessel, emptying herself of everything: fear, doubt, memory, leaving only a void waiting to be filled with purpose. The Ancient One's instructions were a mantra in her mind. You are a conduit. The moment of totality. The sharp, rhythmic tap of a staff announced Alara's arrival long before her face appeared at the door. The traitoress, which looked more agitated than ever, her one good eye blazing with a frantic energy. "The viper," Alara hissed, her voice cracking. "The hunters found nothing. No tracks, no nests, nothing but old bones and silence. You lied." Morgana opened her eyes slowly, her gaze as calm as a deep lake. "The shadow scale is a creature of magic, Alara, not just flesh. It reveals itself only to those it deems worthy. Perhaps your hunters lack the necessary purity of intent." Alara's face contorted with fury. She slammed her staff against the door. "Do not mock me. Fenrir's patience is at an end. The vampires are massing at the northern edge of the territory. He will not wait for the eclipse. He will take what he needs from you tonight, by force, and be done with it." This was a critical development. If Fenrir moved early, all was lost. Morgana had to project an unshakable confidence she did not entirely feel. "Then he will die," she stated, her voice flat and absolute. "And his pack with him. The spell is a lock, and the eclipse is the only key. Forcing it will break the mechanism. Tell him, if he values the lives of his people, he will wait for the appointed hour." She saw the doubt warring with the greed in Alara's face. The lie had been nurtured for so long, it had its own roots. "You are bluffing." "Am I?" Morgana leaned forward, the silver chains clinking. "You felt the energy in the ritual chamber. You saw the instability. Push me, and I will unleash it all. I will burn this forest to the ground and take every one of you with me. Tell him that." For a long moment, they stared at each other, two old women bound by a history of friendship and betrayal, now locked in a final, silent battle of wills. Finally, with a sound of disgust, Alara turned and shuffled away, her steps hurried. She would deliver the message. She was too invested in the promise of power to risk its annihilation. The day wore on, the silence deepening. When Talia came for her watch, her report was grim. "Fenrir is in a rage," she whispered, her face drawn. "He's pulled all patrols back to the den. He's consolidating his forces here, around the ritual chamber. He knows the vampires will attack during the eclipse. He means to have his prize first." She swallowed hard. "Orkin is watching me. I think he suspects something." "Be ready, child," Morgana said, her voice soft but iron hard. "When the chaos comes, it will be swift." Remember the timing. The full shadow. I remember, Talia whispered, her knuckles white as she gripped her spear. As twilight began to bleed into the forest, a new presence arrived at the dungeon. Luna Ayizi stood before the cell door, not as a guard, but as a petitioner. She carried a water skin and a small loaf of whey bread. "For your strength," Luna said, her voice low and formal as she passed them through the slot. Her striking amber eyes, so like her father's, held none of his rage, only a deep, troubled conflict. "My father, his path is set in stone. He sees only the thread in front of him, not the abyss at his feet." Morgana accepted the offerings. A leader who cannot see the larger battlefield will lead his army off a cliff. Luna's gaze was intense. "This spell of yours, if it were to be cast, what would it do?" Morgana chose her words with the care of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. "It would not grant power. It would break a chain. It would set the balance right." She did not say whose chain. She did not need to. Understanding dawned in Luna's eyes, followed by a flicker of something that might have been hope or terror. She gave a curt nod and walked away, leaving Morgana with the distinct sense that another piece on the board had just shifted its allegiance. Night fell, the last night before the end. The darkness was absolute, the moon not yet risen, the stars blotted out by a high, thin veil of cloud. It was the calm before the storm. Morgana could feel the vampires out there in the blackness, a cold, patient pressure. She could feel Fenrir's boiling impatience in the den above, and she could feel the celestial clock ticking down, second by second. She took the vial of starlight moss from its hiding place and held it tight in her palm. It pulsed with a soft, inner light, resonating with the approaching cosmic event. There was nothing left to do now but wait. The players were in position. The stage was set. The final act was upon them. The moon rose, a bloated, coppery orb already bearing the first, faint nibble of the earth's shadow. A collective, primal shudder ran through the pack. Howls, not of challenge, but of unease, echoed through the blackwood. The eclipse had begun. Morgana stood in her cell, every sense screaming. The air crackled with impending doom. She could hear Fenrir's roars from the ritual chamber, commands barked in a voice fraying at the edges of control. The vampires would be moving now, using the creeping darkness as their cloak. The door to her cell exploded inward. It was not Talia, but Beta Orkin, his face a mask of brutal efficiency. "The Alpha calls for you, witch. Your time for games is over." He and another warrior grabbed her, their grip bruising, and hauled her into the corridor. The plan was in ruins. They were taking her early. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to paralyze her. But as they dragged her towards the cavern, she saw Talia, pressed against the wall, her eyes wide with horror. Morgana caught her gaze and gave a sharp, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Not yet. The ritual chamber was a vision of pandemonium. Torches guttered, casting frantic shadows. The entire pack was assembled, a sea of fur, fong, and feverish eyes, all focused on the stone altar. Fenrir stood before it in his full hybrid form, a giant of barely contained fury. Alara was at his side, clutching her staff, her face alight with a frantic greed. "Now!" Fenrir bellowed, as Morgana was thrown onto the cold altar stone. The bite of the silver chains was a familiar agony. The moon darkens. Give me the spell. Outside, the sounds of battle erupted. Snarls clashed with the cold, sibilant hisses of vampires. Steel rang against claws. The Crimson Court had attacked. "This is your last chance," Fenrir roared, placing a massive, clawed hand on her chest, the pressure threatening to crush her ribs. Morgana looked past him at the high, natural opening in the cavern wall. The moon was a sliver of burning copper, the shadow swallowing a hole. Totality was moments away. "Very well," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. She had to seize this, to twist his premature move to her advantage. "The final component is my life's breath, spoken into the air at the moment of total darkness." It was a lie, a final, desperate stalling tactic. But it was a lie he, in his desperation, might believe. Fenrir's eyes widened. He leaned in, his foul breath washing over her. "Then speak." The world held its breath. The battle outside seemed to pause. The last sliver of copper light vanished. Totality. Darkness, absolute and profound, fell over the forest. The world was plunged into an eerie, premature night, the air grown cold. The only light in the chamber came from the guttering torches and the faint, ethereal glow of the hidden stars in the now visible sky. Now, Morgana's body went rigid. She ignored Fenrir, ignored the pain, ignored everything. Her mind became a single, focused point. She poured every ounce of her will, every shred of her remaining power, into the spell. The starlight moss in her hidden palm grew warm, then hot, its energy merging with her own. A gasp went through the pack. A soft, silver light began to emanate from Morgana's body. Not the flickering, unstable light of her previous display, but a pure, relentless, and expanding radiance. It pulsed from her in waves, pushing back the darkness of the eclipse and the shadows in the cavern. Fenrir stumbled back, shielding his eyes. "What is this? What are you doing?" "I'm not breaking your curse, Fenrir." Morgana's voice boomed, amplified by the power coursing through her. No longer a rasp, but a clarion call. "I am breaking your hold." The silver light shot out, not towards the wolves, but towards the center of the chamber. It sought the nexus, the convergence of ley lines beneath the altar. The very stone beneath her began to glow with intricate, burning symbols. The air hummed with a frequency that made teeth ache and bones vibrate. From the shadows at the edge of the chamber, a massive form of living darkness coalesced. Karail, the shadow wolf, summoned by its master's rage. It lunged towards the altar, its obsidian teeth aimed for Morgana's throat. "Talia! Now!" Morgana screamed, a blur of motion. Talia, moving with a speed she never knew she possessed, slammed her spear into the back of the warrior, holding Morgana. As he roared in surprise, she grabbed Morgana's arm and pulled, yanking her from the altar, just as Karail's jaws snapped shut on empty air. Chaos. Absolute, beautiful chaos. The silver light from the altar flared, a pillar of pure energy shooting up through the cavern's opening, connecting with the darkened sun. It wasn't a spell of destruction, but of revelation, of unbinding. It washed over the pack, and where it touched the wolves, a change occurred. The frenzy in their eyes cleared. The compulsion, the magical dominance that Fenrir exerted, flickered and died. They looked at their alpha, and for the first time, they saw not a god, but a tyrant. Luna Ayizi stepped forward, her voice cutting through the bedlam. "The chain is broken. See him for what he is." Fenrir howled, a sound of pure, undiluted betrayal and fury. He turned on his daughter, but his own pack, now freed from his will, hesitated, a wall of confused and newly independent faces standing between them. Morgana, supported by Talia, stood at the edge of the maelstrom. The first part was done. The pack was free, but the spell was not yet complete, and Fenrir, and the monster he commanded, were still very much alive. The final sacrifice was yet to be made. The cavern was a snapshot of frozen chaos. The pillar of silver light from the altar illuminated faces contorted in confusion, rage, and dawning clarity. Fenrir stood isolated, his monstrous form heaving, the bond that had made his pack an extension of his will now severed like a snapped tendon. The shadow wolf, Karail, circled him, a vortex of hatred and cold, its red eyes fixed on Morgana. "Oh, you broke it," Fenrir snarled, the words thick with disbelief and a pain deeper than any wound. "You broke me. I freed them," Morgana corrected, her voice strained but clear, leaning heavily on Talia. The spell's initial release had drained her, but the core of it still burned within, unfinished. "You were the true curse upon this pack." From the chamber's entrance, a new, chilling voice cut through the air. A fascinating turn of events. Vladimir Crimson stood there, flanked by a half-dozen of his pale, elegant kin. They were untouched by the battle, their clothes pristine, their eyes gleaming with cold amusement. They had let the wolves and the spell do the work for them, and now they had come to claim the spoils. The mighty Alpha, deposed by a dying crone, Vladimir purred, his gaze sweeping over the scene before landing hungrily on Morgana. And the source of such delicious power, still breathing. "My lord Valerius will be most pleased. We will take the witch, and what remains of your pack will serve as cattle. This was the unforeseen consequence. The vampire saw a power vacuum and moved to fill it. Morgana's plan had shattered one threat only to unleash another, potentially worse. Fenrir's rage found a new target. With a roar that shook the cavern, he and the shadowy Corail launched themselves not at Morgana, but at the vampires. It was a cataclysm of Fong and shadow against cold, calculated speed. The freed pack, leaderless and terrified, recoiled from the battle. Morgana! Talia cried, pulling her back as a vampire was hurled past them, its body crumbling to ash. This was the moment. The spell was not complete. The unbinding was only the first phase. The Ancient One's words echoed in her mind. The chains that bind you are also your anchor. The altar, Talia. I must get back. But the way was blocked by the titanic struggle between Fenrir and Vladimir, with Corail tearing through vampire ranks. Luna saw their plight. With a defiant cry, she rallied a handful of loyalists, wolves who still followed her out of respect, not compulsion, and carved a path through the chaos, her own claws meeting vampire flesh. Go! Luna shouted, her eyes meeting Morgana's for a split second. An understanding, an alliance forged in the crucible of necessity. Talia half-dragged, half-carried Morgana back towards the glowing altar. The silver chains felt like ice and fire, grounding her, focusing the chaotic energy. As she stumbled onto the dais, she saw him, Omega Khan, the lowest of the low, standing his ground against a vampire scout, using his own body as a shield to give him the final few feet. This was it, the final sacrifice. Morgana tore the vial of starlight moss from her robes. She didn't sprinkle it. She crushed it in her palm, mixing the iridescent powder with the blood from her silver-scarred wrists. The power that surged through her was blinding, agonizing, ecstatic. She was the conduit, and the cosmic fire of the eclipse flooded her. She began the final gestures, her hands moving in a complex, ancient dance, pulling the silvery rivers of the ley lines into herself, weaving them with the celestial energy. The pillar of light intensified, now shot through with threads of gold and deep violet. Fenrir, sensing the shift in power, broke from his fight with Vladimir. No! He lunged for the altar, Corail a black comet at his side. Morgana did not flinch. She met his charge, her hands still moving, completing the sequence. As Fenrir's claws reached for her, and Corail's obsidian maw opened to consume her, she slammed her bloody, powder-coated palms onto the center of the altar. She did not speak a word of destruction. She whispered a single, true name. Corail. The name was an unbinding, a key. The pillar of light did not explode. It imploded, collapsing inward onto the shadow wolf. The creature of darkness froze, its form writhing as the pure, focused energy of the spell, the very antithesis of its being, poured into it. It was not being destroyed, it was being unmade. A silent, shrieking void of sound tore through the cavern. The light consumed the shadow, and with it, the tether that bound the demon to Fenrir. The Alpha screamed, a raw, soul-shattering sound as the parasitic entity that had supplemented his power for decades was violently ripped from him. He collapsed, not dead, but utterly broken, his body shrinking back to a mere man, his power extinguished. The light faded. The eclipse was ending, the first sliver of sunlight piercing the darkness. Silence descended, heavier than before. The remaining vampires, seeing their primary target broken and the witch still standing, shrouded in the aftermath of unimaginable power, hesitated. Vladimir gave a curt signal, and they melted back into the shadows from whence they came. Morgana slumped over the altar, her life force spent. The spell was complete. The chain was broken. The demon was unmade. The Alpha was fallen. She had won. But as the world swam in and out of focus, she knew the cost. The final sacrifice had not been her life, but everything that was left in it. She had poured her essence, her magic, her very soul into that working. She was empty. The last thing she felt was not the cold stone, but Talia's arms catching her, and Celine's voice crying out her name from the chamber's entrance. She had held the line. The dawn was theirs. But for Morgana Ashford, the long night had finally come. The first true rays of the post-eclipse sun pierced the cavern, illuminating a scene of devastation and rebirth. Dust motes danced in the beams, falling upon the still form of Fenrir, a broken king surrounded by the ruins of his reign. The air, once thick with magic and rage, now held the simple, clean sense of dew and damp stone. Morgana swam back to consciousness cradled in Talia's arms. A profound emptiness echoed within her, a hollowed-out cavern where a sea of power had once roared. Her limbs were leaden, the familiar hum of magic gone, leaving only the weary ache of an old woman. She was a sword that had been swung for the final time, its edge gone, its purpose fulfilled. Grandmother. The voice was a balm, a tether pulling her fully into the light. Selene knelt beside her, her fiery red hair a splash of vibrant color in the muted dawn, her inherited violet eyes wide with tears and relief. She clutched Morgana's hand, her touch sparking a faint, final ember of warmth in the cold void. "You're alive," Selene whispered, her voice cracking. The spell, Morgana's own voice, was a dry leaf, barely audible. "It is done," Talia answered softly, her face smudged with dirt and blood, but her green eyes clear and steady. "The shadow is gone. Fenrir, he lives, but his power is broken. The pack, they are free." Morgana's gaze drifted across the cavern. She saw Luna Ayezi standing over her father's prone form, not with triumph, but with a somber, heavy responsibility. The surviving members of the pack gathered around her, their postures not of submission, but of wary allegiance. They were wounded, confused, but the feral gleam of blind obedience was gone from their eyes. They were individuals again. The cost was etched into every face, into the still forms that littered the floor, wolf and vampire alike. But from the ashes of the old, a new order was tentatively forming. With Talia and Selene's help, Morgana was helped to her feet. Her body felt impossibly frail, each step a monumental effort. They moved through the cavern, and the wolves parted for them, not with fear, but with a newfound, hesitant respect. They saw not a weapon or a prize, but the architect of their freedom, now spent and mortal. They emerged from the den into the morning light. The Blackwood Forest, no longer cursed, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Birdsong, absent for weeks, tentatively filled the air. The leaves shimmered with fresh dew, and the world felt clean, scrubbed by the cosmic event and the purging fire of the night's battle. Morgana stopped, leaning against a great oak, and simply breathed. She had not felt the sun on her face in what felt like a lifetime. Its warmth was a gentle kiss, a promise. "What will you do?" Morgana asked Talia, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. Talia looked back at the den, at Luna organizing the survivors. "I will stay," she said, her decision firm. "They will need guides, those who remember what we were, and who can help us become what we might be. Luna, she will be a good alpha." Morgana nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. The compassionate guard had found her purpose. Her gaze then fell on Selene. "And you, my child, the Jade Eye is safe. It was always you." Selene hugged her grandmother gently, afraid she might break. "I will rebuild the coven," she vowed. "The right way. A sanctuary, not a fortress." It was a good future, a future she had bought with her sacrifice. As they stood there, a limping figure approached. Omega Khan, holding a fresh water skin. He offered it to Morgana without a word, his head bowed not in servitude, but in gratitude. She accepted it, her hand brushing his. Another soul reclaimed. Morgana Ashford was a shell. The great sorceress of the Silver Moon Coven was gone, her power expended in one glorious, final stand. The magic that had defined her for centuries was a memory, a story to be told. She was now just an old woman, tired to her very bones. But as she looked at her granddaughter, at the fledgling alliance between witch and wolf, at the dawn breaking over a liberated forest, she knew a profound and quiet peace. The hunt was over. The prey had outlasted the hunter. Her story was ending, but others, richer and brighter, were just beginning. "Take me home, Selene," she whispered, and leaning on her granddaughter, Morgana Ashford walked away from the darkness, step by slow, deliberate step, into the new dawn. Thank you for watching. First of all, The stories we tell are either entirely fictional or inspired by real events. If you have any stories you'd like to share with us, let's chat in the comment section. If you liked our story, we'd appreciate it if you gave our video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on our next videos. You can check out the playlist created for other stories on our channel in the card section at the top right. See you in the next video.